The dust of Yanha village settled on everything. It clung to the cracked mud walls of the huts, coated the sparse leaves of the wilting banana trees, and settled deep in the lines etched onto the faces of its people. It was the dust of poverty, fine and persistent, a constant reminder of the emptiness in their bellies and the thinness of their hopes. Even the air tasted of it, dry, gritty, carrying the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else, despair. Maybe. Life here was a relentless grind, a cycle of backbreaking work for yields that seemed to shrink with every passing season. Yet, even in Yanha, life insisted on moments of noise, if not always joy. Tonight, laughter, loud and perhaps a little forced, drifted from the courtyard of the scholar's house. Clapping, the clatter of bowls, congratulations shouted over the din. His son had passed some important exam, become a third-class scholar, whatever that meant. For most, it meant a feast, a rare chance to fill their stomachs with something other than watery rice gruel. Trays piled high, baskets of rice, unimaginable luxury. The sounds were a stark counterpoint to the silence pressing in on the small, dilapidated hut where Mr. Bew and his wife, Mai, resided. They weren't invited. They rarely were. Their poverty was too stark, too uncomfortable a mirror for others to face during celebrations. Mr. Bew stood outside his own threshold, a gaunt figure silhouetted against the failing light. Hunter, farmer, provider. The titles felt hollow tonight. His shoulders slumped under the weight of more than just the empty bamboo basket leaning against the wall. Days spent tracking in the parched woodlands, setting traps with trembling hope, only to return with nothing but aching muscles and the bitter taste of failure. His face, weathered like old leather, was a mask of exhaustion, but beneath it simmered a quiet desperation that tightened his jaw and shadowed his eyes. He looked towards the distant sounds of revelry, not with envy, but with a profound weariness. Another day closer to, what? Starvation? Shame. Mai watched him from the doorway, her own heart echoing his despair. Her hands, calloused and stained from endless scrubbing, mending, and tending their pathetic scrap of a garden, twisted in the rough fabric of her worn tunic. She was younger than the worry in her eyes suggested, her resilience stretched thin like an old fishing net. She knew that look on Bew's face. The quiet before the storm of self-recrimination, or worse, the crushing silence of surrender. Their son, Mio, only 8 years old but already carrying the quiet solemnity of a child forced to understand hardship too soon, slept fitfully inside on a thin mat. He was the anchor of their world, the tiny flame of hope they shielded against the relentless winds of misfortune. But hope needed fuel, and their reserves were running dangerously low. How could they feed him? How could they offer him a future brighter than this dusty, hopeless present? It was a question that gnawed at my day and night. Anything? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, already knowing the answer. Bew shook his head, avoiding her gaze. He couldn't bear the disappointment he knew he'd see reflected there, mirroring his own. The forest, it's empty, Mai. As if the very animals have fled this cursed land. He kicked listlessly at the dirt floor. Don't say that, Mai chided gently, though fear fluttered in her own chest. Cursed land, people whispered such things about Yanha, and especially about the dense, tangled wilderness that pressed against the village's western edge. The western forest. Even its name seemed to carry a chill. Old tales lingered, passed down in hushed tones around flickering oil lamps, tales of spirits, who guarded the ancient trees, of unfortunate souls who ventured too deep and were never seen again, or returned, changed. They said the forest held secrets, both wondrous and terrifying. They said it demanded respect, appeasement. That it didn't take kindly to trespassers driven by mere human need. Superstition, perhaps. But in a life where tangible hope was scarce, the intangible held a powerful sway. Who could say for sure what lurked beneath those tangled roots and shadowed leaves? What else is there to say? Bew's voice was rough with frustration. The rains failed again. The little we planted withered. The river yields nothing but mud. We owe too much. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The shadow of debt collectors, of losing even this meager hut, loomed large. Dignity was a luxury they could no longer afford. Survival was the only currency that mattered now. Mai stepped closer, touching his arm. Her touch was light, but grounding. There must be something, Beau. Some way. He finally met her eyes, and she saw not surrender, but a flicker of something else. A desperate resolve. He lowered his voice, glancing around as if the silent trees themselves might be listening. There is, perhaps. Remember that patch I told you about? Deep in the western woods. The abandoned cornfield. Mai's breath hitched. She remembered. He'd stumbled upon it weeks ago while hunting, far beyond the usual trails. A patch of forgotten land, overgrown but potentially fertile, nestled deep within the territory everyone else avoided. He'd mentioned it once, half jokingly, half wistfully, as a place untouched, unclaimed. Beau, no. That place, you know what they say about that forest. It's too far. Too wild. The superstitions, usually dismissed in daylight, felt suddenly potent as dusk deepened. What choice do we have? He countered, his voice gaining intensity. Wait here until we starve. Until Mio cries from hunger and we have nothing to give him. That land. It looked good. Overgrown, yes, but the soil felt rich beneath the weeds. No one's touched it in years. If we could clear it, plant something, it could be enough. A real chance. His eyes gleamed with a feverish light, the light of a man clutching at a final, perilous straw. But the spirits, Mai whispered, the word tasting like fear on her tongue. We'll be careful, Beau insisted, though a tremor ran through him too. He wasn't immune to the old fears. We'll work hard, show respect. What are spirits compared to watching our son waste away? This isn't about greed, Mai. This is about survival. It's about Mio having a chance to eat tomorrow. He gripped her hand, his calloused fingers tight around hers. It's a risk. A terrible risk, maybe. But isn't doing nothing the greater danger now? Mai looked at her husband, saw the raw desperation warring with fear in his eyes. She looked towards the thin partition behind which their son slept, his small breaths of fragile sound in the oppressive silence. Survival. Dignity. A chance for Mio. Were those worth facing the unknown terrors of the western forest? Were they worth defying the whispers of generations, the warnings embedded in the very soul of Yenha village? The scholar's feast faded into insignificance, replaced by the stark reality of their choice. Stay and wither, or gamble everything on a patch of haunted earth. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fears and the weight of their decision. Finally, Mai nodded, a single, jerky movement. Hope, fragile and sharp, pierced through her fear. Yes, she breathed. For Mio. A grim determination settled over Beau's features. The decision was made. Tonight, under the cloak of darkness, while the rest of Yenha celebrated or slept oblivious, they would gather their meager tools, a worn hoe, a rusty machete, a few handfuls of rice wrapped in banana leaves. They would take a torch, a small flickering flame against the immense darkness waiting for them. With nothing left to lose, or perhaps everything, they turned their faces towards the whispering shadows of the west, stepping onto a path from which there might be no return. The path swallowed them whole, the vibrant sounds of Yenha fading behind them, replaced by the hushed, watchful silence of the ancient woods. Beau led the way, the flickering torch in his hand casting erratic shadows that danced like Ma among the trees, distorting familiar shapes into monstrous forms. Mai followed close behind, the carrying pole digging into her shoulder, her eyes darting nervously into the oppressive darkness that pressed in from all sides. Every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot in the profound quiet, every hoot of a distant owl felt like a mournful warning. This was the western forest, a place whispered about in tales meant to frighten children and caution adults, a realm where the veil between worlds felt unnervingly thin. Deeper they walked, the air growing heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something wild and primal. The trees here were giants, their gnarled branches interwoven high above, blocking out the sliver of moon and stars, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. Dew pushed onward, relying on a memory weeks old, searching for landmarks that seemed to shift and vanish in the deceptive torchlight. Was this the twisted banyan tree he'd noted? Or that cluster of black rocks? Doubt gnawed at him, a cold counterpoint to the sweat beading on his brow. He cursed under his breath as the torch sputtered, nearly extinguished by a sudden gust of wind that moaned through the upper branches. He shielded the flame, his knuckles white. Losing the light here, unthinkable. The ground underfoot was uneven, a treacherous carpet of exposed roots and loose stones. Here and there, the path, barely more than a deer trail, skirted past unnerving reminders of the forest's reputation. Low mounds of earth, half hidden by encroaching vegetation, marked ownerless graves, forgotten souls left to the forest's embrace. Some were marked by simple, weathered stones, others were just anonymous humps in the landscape. Mai averted her eyes each time, murmuring a prayer under her breath. Occasionally, they passed small, dilapidated shrines, altars to forgotten spirits, perhaps, their offerings long since decayed, the joss stick holders empty and green with moss. It felt like trespassing, disturbing a slumber best left unbroken. They stumbled more than once, their feet catching on unseen obstacles, a sharp intake of breath the only sound acknowledging the near fall. Keep moving. That was the imperative. Hours seemed to crawl by, measured only by the ache in their limbs and the slow consumption of the torchwood. The hour of the pig, Hoi, must have begun, the deepest part of the night when the forest felt most alive, most watchful. Dew's memory, hazy at first, began to sharpen as they crossed a dry, stony stream bed. Yes, he remembered this. The land should rise soon. He pointed with the torch towards a dense thicket clinging to a slope. There, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Behind those vines. It should be there. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through Mai's exhaustion. They scrambled up the incline, Bew hacking at the tangled vegetation with his machete, revealing a structure almost completely consumed by the wilderness. It wasn't much to look at. A Nuang hut, a simple field watcher's shelter, built low to the ground, barely high enough for a person to crouch inside, certainly not tall enough to stand. Its thatched roof had mostly collapsed, and the woven bamboo walls were rotting, blackened by years of damp and neglect. Clearly, the cornfield it once guarded had been abandoned long, long ago. Weeds grew thick and tall all around it, nature reclaiming its own with patient insistence. Bew pushed aside the flimsy, half-rotted door flap and ducked inside, Mai hesitating for a moment behind him. The air within was thick, almost suffocating, heavy with the cloying smell of mold, dust, and something else, something vaguely animal, musky and unpleasant. It was pitch black. Bew thrust the torch forward, the sudden flare of orange light painting the cramped interior in grotesque relief. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, hung from the low rafters. The dirt floor was damp, littered with debris, leaves, unidentifiable droppings, fragments of decayed wood. A pervasive sense of desolation filled the tiny space. It felt wrong. A place long given over to decay and silence. Why here? Why choose this specific, forgotten corner? Then, a sound. A soft whimper, almost lost in the oppressive stillness. Both froze, their hearts pounding in unison. Bew slowly swept the torchlight across the floor. In the far corner, huddled amongst a pile of damp rags and leaves, was a small, shivering form. Mai gasped, clutching Bew's arm. It was a dog. A puppy, judging by its size, no bigger than Bew's calloused hand. But what a strange creature it was. Its fur, though matted with dirt and grime, was stark white. And it had only 3 legs. One front leg was missing entirely, ending in a blunt, scarred stump near the shoulder. It didn't look like a recent injury, more like a congenital defect, perhaps. Its tail, too, was unnaturally short, as if docked. As the torchlight fell upon it, the puppy blinked open its eyes, large, luminous, and an unsettling shade of copper-brown. It shivered violently, letting out another weak, pitiful moan. "Gods above," Mai breathed, a mixture of shock and revulsion in her voice. "What is that?" Bu stared, equally stunned. A three-legged, white puppy, abandoned in the heart of this haunted forest, miles from any dwelling. It made no sense. He noticed more details now. The fur on its three remaining legs was strangely marked, solid black socks extending halfway up each leg, a stark contrast to the pure white of its body. And around its eyes, was that a trick of the light, or were there darker swirls in the fur, mimicking extra eyes? Utterly bizarre. Unnatural. Fear, cold and sharp, prickled Mai's skin. "Bu, this isn't right," she stammered. "A creature like this, here. It's a bad omen. The forest spirits." Bu felt the same superstitious chill. He remembered the village warnings, the unwritten rule drummed into every child of Yen Ha: never spend the night in the deep forest. Doing so was an offense against the forest god, an invitation for the Ma to haunt and destroy. If caught out after dark, one sought shelter in a watchtower, lit a fire. The firelight, it was said, confused the spirits, hid the number of occupants. They had planned to build a fire, but finding this thing felt like a sign. A warning, perhaps. He thought of the story of Mrs. Howe, who'd sheltered from rain in a cave and returned late, only to be found days later, lost and raving, her mouth stuffed with cow dung by mischievous or malevolent spirits. Was this puppy bait? A trick? Yet, the creature whimpered again, a sound of pure misery that tugged at something deep within him, bypassing the fear. It looked utterly helpless, abandoned, shivering not just from cold but likely from pain and hunger. He saw the faint rise and fall of its ribcage. It was alive, but barely. "It's just a dog," Bu said, his voice rough, trying to convince himself as much as her. He stepped closer, kneeling beside the trembling pup. "Look at it. It's half-starved. Someone must have left it here to die." Cruel, but perhaps more plausible than forest spirits leaving deformed puppies as warnings. He reached out a hesitant hand. The puppy flinched but didn't snap, only pressing itself deeper into the pile of rags, its copper eyes wide with fear. Compassion warred with deep-seated dread. To leave it would be cruel. To take it in felt like inviting the unknown, the potentially dangerous, into their already precarious lives. What if Mai was right? What if it was an omen? But leaving it felt like a different kind of sin, a failure of basic kindness they couldn't afford, spiritually speaking. They came here seeking life, a chance to nurture growth. Could they start that by turning their backs on this small, suffering creature? "We can't just leave it," Bu decided, his voice firm now. He gently scooped up the puppy. It was lighter than he expected, fragile bones beneath the matted fur. It let out another soft whine but didn't struggle. "We'll take it back to the fire. Warm it up. Maybe it's meant to be. A virtue for Mio," he added softly, invoking their son's name, their ultimate reason. Mai hesitated for another moment, her gaze sweeping the dark, oppressive corners of the abandoned hut, her ears straining against the silence. But seeing the tiny creature cradled in her husband's arms, seeing its vulnerability, melted the edges of her fear. She nodded slowly. Perhaps Bu was right. Perhaps it was just a dog. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a test of their character by the very forest they sought to claim a piece of. They quickly gathered dry wood from just outside the hut, Bu clearing a space on the damp earth floor while Mai held the shivering puppy, shielding it with her body. Soon, a large, bright fire blazed in the center of the small space, pushing back the oppressive darkness and the musty smell, replacing it with the welcome scent of wood smoke. As the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the moldy walls, they looked at the peculiar creature they'd saved, now nestled close to the warmth, its breathing evening out slightly. Was it merely a stray, or something more? The forest outside held its breath, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly alone. As the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the moldy walls, they looked at the peculiar creature they'd saved. Was it merely a stray, or something more? The forest outside held its breath, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly alone. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the strange sighs of the wind and the unsettling proximity of the deep woods. But dawn eventually broke, filtering weak, greenish light through the canopy, chasing away the worst of the night's fears, if not the gnawing uncertainty. With the first light came the first stirrings of determined hope. This piece of reclaiming wasteland, abandoned and forgotten, was theirs for the taking. Theirs to tame. Their future, Mio's future, depended on it. They ate a meager breakfast of cold rice balls saved from the previous day, sharing a small portion with the puppy huddled near the revived fire. The little creature, they decided to call him Tam, for his 3 legs, ate hesitantly at first, then with surprising eagerness, looking up at them with those unnerving copper eyes between bites. He seemed a little stronger this morning, the violent shivering subsided, though he still moved with a pronounced limp, favoring his missing front leg. After eating, Butte took up his sturdy hoe, its worn wooden handle familiar in his grasp, while Mai wielded her sickle, its curved blade sharpened against a rock. The work began. And it was brutal work. The land hadn't just been abandoned, it had been utterly neglected for years, maybe decades. Thick roots snaked through the soil like petrified serpents, resisting the bite of Butte's hoe. Thorny vines tore at their clothes and skin. Tough grasses, taller than Mai, had to be hacked down with relentless swings of the sickle. Sweat poured down their faces, stinging their eyes, plastering their thin clothes to their backs. Muscles screamed in protest. Blisters rose on their hands. Yet, they pressed on, fueled by a desperate energy. Every cleared patch, every pile of uprooted weeds, felt like a small victory against the crushing weight of their poverty. They pictured neat rows of corn, plump tubers, a harvest that would mean food on the table, medicine for Mio if he fell ill, perhaps even new clothes. Hope was a powerful taskmaster. As they toiled under the diffused forest light, Tam slowly ventured out of the hut. He seemed revitalized by the food and warmth. Limping awkwardly but with growing confidence, he explored the cleared area around the hut, sniffing inquisitively at overturned roots and piles of leaves. He stayed close, particularly to Mai, occasionally nudging her hand with his wet nose or rubbing his head against her leg with a surprising display of affection. Mai found herself softening towards the strange little dog. Despite his odd appearance, there was an undeniable vulnerability about him. She'd scooped him up when he got underfoot, murmuring reassurances, feeling the fragile bones beneath his surprisingly soft white fur. He seemed drawn to her, a silent, three-legged shadow as she worked. They labored through the morning, the sun climbing higher, though its full heat was tempered by the dense foliage overhead. The air remained thick, humid, alive with the drone of unseen insects. Around noon, they stopped, utterly exhausted, sharing the last of the rice balls and some slightly brackish water Beau had found in a nearby stream. They sat in the shade of the dilapidated hut, backs against the rotting walls, silent for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the forest, bird calls, the rustle of leaves, the incessant buzz of life. Tam lay down near Mai's feet, panting softly, his copper eyes half closed. It was mid-afternoon when the strangeness began. They had resumed their work, Beau tackling a particularly stubborn patch of earth near a gnarled zone tree at the edge of the clearing. Mai was gathering cut weeds into piles. Tam, who had been dozing nearby, suddenly scrambled to his feet, his peculiar body tense. He let out a series of sharp, insistent yaps, utterly different from his earlier contented whimpers. He wasn't playing. He ran towards the base of the zone tree, his barks growing louder, more urgent. And then he started digging. Frantically. His one good front paw threw dirt backwards, his small body quivering with intense focus. Tam. Hey. Stop that. Bu called out, annoyed. They had enough work to do without the dog making more mess. He waved his hand dismissively. Get away from there. But Tam ignored him. He whined, a high-pitched sound of urgency, and dug faster, his nose pressed close to the ground. He glanced back at Bu, barked again, then returned to his frantic excavation. It was odd. Extremely odd. Mai paused in her work, watching the dog with a frown. What's gotten into him, Bu? Mischief, probably, Bu grumbled, turning back to his own patch. He swung the hoe twice more, the blade biting into the earth. But Tam wouldn't stop. The dog suddenly abandoned his digging, limped quickly over to Bu, and nipped, not hard, but insistently, at the cuff of his worn trousers, trying to pull him towards the tree. Then he ran back to the spot and resumed digging, barking continuously. This was more than mischief. Bu lowered his hoe, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The dog's persistence was unnerving. Annoyance gave way to a flicker of curiosity, mixed with that underlying unease the forest always seemed to inspire. What could possibly be so interesting under an old zone tree? He walked over, Mai following close behind, her expression wary. Tam stopped digging as they approached, looking up at them expectantly, panting, his tail stump quivering. He whined again, nudging the disturbed earth with his nose. Bu shrugged, more to dismiss his own apprehension than anything else. He swung the heavy hoe, aiming for the spot Tam had indicated. Instead of the familiar soft resistance of soil and roots, the hoe struck something hard with a solid thunk that jarred his arms to the shoulders. He froze. Mai gasped softly. They looked at each other, eyes wide. Rock. Probably just a large rock. Common enough. But, the way Tam was watching them, his strange copper eyes fixed on the spot, his body trembling slightly. Carefully now, Bu used the edge of the hoe to scrape away the loose soil Tam had dislodged. He probed gently. Definitely something solid, flat. Not like any rock he'd ever hit. He knelt down, abandoning the hoe, and began clearing the earth with his bare hands, Mai kneeling beside him, pushing aside dirt and pebbles. Their fingers brushed against wood. Dark, smooth wood. Heart pounding, Bu dug faster, his initial curiosity replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Mai worked alongside him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Slowly, painstakingly, they unearthed the object. It was a box. A wooden box, rectangular, slightly larger than Bu's two hands placed together. And it was beautiful. Even covered in dirt, they could see it was made of high-quality timber, dark, heavy agarwood, perhaps. Intricately carved with swirling patterns, designs half obscured by time and earth. A faint, spicy scent rose from the wood as they cleared the last of the dirt. It looked ancient, valuable, and utterly out of place in this wild, forgotten corner of the forest. A nasty scratch marred one side, the mark from Bu's careless hoe strike. Who would bury such a thing here? And why? Their minds raced. Bu's hands trembled as he fumbled with a tarnished metal clasp. It resisted for a moment, then sprang open with a faint click. They leaned closer, peering inside, their breath held captive in their chests. Nestled on a bed of faded, rotting silk lay a single object, a bracelet. Not just any bracelet. It was jade. A thick bangle of deep, lustrous, blood-red jade, polished smooth, gleaming even in the dim forest light. It seemed to pulse with a faint inner light, captivating, hypnotic. Silence. Utter silence, save for the suddenly deafening thud of their own hearts. They stared, mesmerized. Bu reached in a trembling hand and lifted the bracelet. It felt unnaturally heavy, and startlingly cold against his warm skin, a chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. He held it up. The light caught its polished surface, revealing depths and swirls within the red stone. They knew nothing of jade, nothing of its value, but they knew, with absolute certainty, that this was treasure. Real treasure. Mai let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. "Bu, it's, she couldn't finish the word. Treasure. The word hung in the air, electric. Bu thought instantly of Mr. Pull, the villager who'd supposedly dug up a cursed artifact years ago but sold it and escaped Yan Ha's crushing poverty, moving his family to distant Tandwin Na. Everyone whispered about his luck, his sudden fortune found in the earth. Was this their turn? Had fate, after years of cruelty, finally decided to smile upon them? This single object could change everything. Food. Security. A future for Mio. Freedom from the dust and despair of Yan Ha. Their eyes met, reflecting a mixture of disbelief, elation, and something else, a dawning, thrilling hope that felt almost as terrifying as the forest itself. And then Bu looked down at Tam. The little three-legged dog sat watching them, his head cocked, those strange copper eyes seeming to hold an ancient knowledge. He hadn't just found a stray puppy. This creature, this uncanny, three-legged enigma, had led them here. To this exact spot. To this buried secret. The jade felt cool against Bu's trembling fingers, a solid promise of a different life. But even as hope surged, a faint, unseen chill seemed to settle in the air around the unearthed treasure. Fortune had smiled, but what price might it demand? The jade felt cool against Bu's trembling fingers, a solid promise of a different life. But even as hope surged, a faint, unseen chill seemed to settle in the air around the unearthed treasure. Fortune had smiled, but what price might it demand? There was no time to ponder. Carefully, reverently, Bu wrapped the blood-red jade bracelet in a scrap of cloth and secured it deep within the folds of his tunic, a heavy, cold weight against his skin. He placed the empty, exquisitely carved agarwood box back into the hole, covering it again with earth, marking the spot near the zone tree with a few strategically placed stones only he would recognize. They couldn't risk leaving the box. Its quality alone might attract unwanted attention if discovered. Tam, the enigmatic three-legged dog, watched the proceedings with his unsettlingly intelligent copper eyes, offering no sound, merely observing. The journey back to Yan Ha village felt vastly different from the trek into the deep forest. Before, they were driven by desperation and a sliver of hope. Now, they were propelled by a nervous, almost frantic energy, burdened by a secret that felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly heavy. Every rustle in the undergrowth made them jump. Every shadow seemed to conceal watching eyes. Was it just their nerves, or did the forest itself feel different, aware of the treasure they carried away from its depths? They spoke little, communicating in hushed tones and furtive glances, their ears straining for any sound of pursuit, human or otherwise. The weight of the jade seemed to grow with every step, a tangible burden of their newfound, unbelievable fortune. Or was it something more? Bu couldn't shake the unnatural coldness that seemed to emanate from the hidden Bengal, a chill that had nothing to do with the forest air. Reaching the familiar, dusty outskirts of Yan Ha brought only partial relief. Secrecy was paramount. News of such a discovery would spread like wildfire, inviting envy, suspicion, and potentially dangerous attention from bandits or even greedy officials. They needed guidance, needed to understand the value of what they possessed, and more importantly, how to convert it into the security they craved without bringing disaster upon themselves. Their first thought, their only thought, was Counselor Guy. He was known throughout the district not just as a respected elder and purveyor of antiques, but as a reasonably fair man, knowledgeable and discreet, certainly more trustworthy than some of the grasping, unscrupulous dealers who occasionally passed through. Leaving Mai and Tam hidden in the hut, the puppy now cleaned and surprisingly docile, Bu hurried towards Guy's slightly larger, better-maintained house near the village center. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and anxiety. But fortune, it seemed, was not yet ready to make things easy. Counselor Guy was away. His daughter-in-law informed Bu, with polite indifference, that the counselor had traveled to the provincial capital to view some goods at the general's residence and wouldn't return for 2, perhaps 3 days. 3 days. The delay felt like an eternity. Bu's brief surge of elation curdled into gnawing unease. He left a message, urging the counselor to visit him immediately upon his return, then trudged back to his own hut, the hidden weight of the jade feeling heavier, colder, more ominous than ever. Back in the stifling confines of their small home, the atmosphere grew tense. The sheer reality of the bracelet, now unwrapped and placed carefully within the flimsy wooden cupboard that held their few possessions, was overwhelming. Mai, despite Bu's repeated, anxious warnings to leave it hidden, couldn't resist its allure. While Bu fretted, pacing the small space, she took it out, her eyes wide with wonder, turning the deep red jade over and over in her hands. "Just look at it, Bu," she breathed, holding it up to the thin shaft of sunlight slanting through a crack in the wall. "Have you ever seen such a color? It must be worth a fortune." She slipped the heavy bangle onto her slender wrist, admiring the way the red stone contrasted with her skin. "Doesn't it look beautiful?" Bu flinched as if struck. As soon as the jade touched her skin, he felt it, a wave of unnatural coldness rolling off her, accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible, yet utterly foul stench, like something long dead and decaying. He recoiled, his hand instinctively going to his nose. "Mai, take it off. Now." His voice was sharp, laced with a sudden, inexplicable fear. It smells wrong. And you feel cold. Like death." Mai looked startled, then slightly offended. "Cold? Don't be ridiculous, it's stifling in here. And it doesn't smell of anything but old wood and maybe a little dust." She sniffed her wrist, then laughed, though perhaps a little nervously now at his vehemence. "Your imagination is running wild, husband. It's just excitement." But seeing the genuine panic in his eyes, she reluctantly slid the bracelet off, her fingers lingering on its smooth, cool surface before placing it back in the cupboard. "Fine. But don't blame me if hiding such beauty brings bad luck. Some things are meant to be admired." Bu wasn't placated. He felt a deep, chilling premonition, a certainty that this object, found in the haunted depths of the forest by a strange, three-legged dog, carried more than just monetary value. It carried a history. A darkness. That night, his fears began to take horrifying shape. Sleep was impossible. The oppressive heat of the autumn night, the cramped hut, the monumental secret hidden just feet away, it all conspired to keep him wide awake, staring into the darkness long after Mai and Tam, curled on a straw mat Bu had grudgingly provided, had succumbed to exhaustion. He needed air. Slipping silently out of the hut, he walked towards the flimsy bamboo fence bordering their tiny yard. The night was unnaturally still, the usual chorus of frogs and insects strangely muted. A thin, hazy mist clung to the ground, swirling like disturbed spirits in the faint starlight. He felt watched. The hairs on his neck prickled. He scanned the darkness, his heart beginning to pound. And then he saw it. Looming just beyond the fence, near the skeletal branches of a dying mango tree, stood a figure. A woman. Her clothes were torn rags, her face indistinct in the gloom, bloated and somehow wrong. She slowly raised a hand, beckoning to him. Bu froze, breath catching in his throat. "Who?" he stammered, taking an involuntary step back, then rubbed his eyes fiercely. When he looked again, the figure was gone. In its place, stuck grotesquely onto the fence, was a paper puppet, crudely made, its painted face mocking him. Relief warred with anger and a deeper, colder fear. A prank? Who would play such a cruel trick? Muttering curses, he ripped the puppet down, crushing it underfoot, but the feeling of malevolent eyes watching him from the darkness lingered long after he retreated back into the dubious safety of the hut. He tried to push the incident from his mind, lighting his pipe with trembling hands, the harsh tobacco smoke doing little to calm his frayed nerves. He eventually lay down again beside Mai, the heavy jade bracelet removed from the cupboard and now hidden beneath his pillow, closer, somehow feeling safer, though a part of him screamed to throw it back into the forest. Exhaustion finally claimed him, pulling him into a shallow, uneasy sleep. He woke abruptly, unsure what had disturbed him. Then he heard it. A soft, rhythmic grinding sound, like teeth gnawing on bone, seeming to come from right beside the bed. His blood ran cold. He didn't dare move, straining his ears in the darkness. He slowly turned his head towards the only reflective surface in the room, a small, cracked mirror hanging on the opposite wall. In the faint moonlight filtering through the doorway, he could see his own reflection, wide-eyed with terror. And behind him, oh gods, behind him, another shape was resolving itself in the dim glass. A figure, draped in white, with long, loose hair obscuring its face, was slowly rising from the floor directly behind where he lay. Its skin seemed unnaturally pale, luminous in the gloom. Panic seized him. A primal scream built in his chest, but no sound escaped. His limbs felt like lead, unresponsive, paralyzed by sheer terror. He tried to turn, to scramble away, to wake Mai, but his body refused to obey. He was trapped, forced to watch in the mirror as the white-clad figure rose fully, its head lolling unnaturally before twisting sharply to the right, fixing its unseen gaze directly on his reflected face. He felt an icy breath on the back of his neck. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the hut door against the frame with a deafening crash. The spell broke. Dew roared, a raw sound of pure terror, throwing himself off the mat, scrambling backwards until he hit the opposite wall, gasping for breath, drenched in cold sweat. Mai shot upright, instantly awake, her own cry muffled by confusion and fear. "Bu. What is it? What's wrong?" He could only point a shaking finger towards the empty space behind the sleeping mat, babbling incoherently. "White, behind me, the mirror." Mai looked, saw nothing but shadows and the flickering moonlight. She quickly got up, secured the rattling door, then rushed to her husband's side, her face pale with worry. "A nightmare, husband." "Just a terrible nightmare," she soothed, pulling him down onto the mat, holding him as he trembled uncontrollably. He knew it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The cold, the presence, the terrifying figure in the mirror, it was agonizingly real. Sleep was now utterly out of the question. Mai, sensing his profound terror, kept the oil lamp burning low and stayed awake with him, holding his hand, whispering calming words, though her own heart fluttered with fear at his state. Dew sat rigid, staring into the darkness, every creak of the hut, every sigh of the wind outside, amplifying his terror. How much longer could this go on? Just as a fragile exhaustion began to claim him again, blurring the edges of his fear, he felt it. A single, cold drop landing squarely on his forehead. Then another. And another. Drip, drip, drip. Instinctively, he wiped his brow, his fingers coming away wet and sticky. He held them up to the lamplight. Red. Thick, viscous, undeniably red. The coppery stench of blood filled his nostrils, choking him. Slowly, dreadfully, he forced himself to look up, towards the low ceiling beams directly above where they sat. His breath hitched in a strangled gasp. Hanging there, clinging to the rough wood like some grotesque insect, was the woman in white from his reflection. Her long, black hair hung down, partially obscuring her deathly pale face, but her eyes were wide open, white orbs staring down at him with vacant intensity. And one arm was missing, severed raggedly at the shoulder. From the raw, dripping stump, thick drops of dark blood fell rhythmically onto the floor, onto him. Drip, drip, drip. This time, the scream ripped itself from his throat, raw and unhinged. He scrambled backwards, eyes fixed on the horrifying apparition, his legs tangling, sending him crashing to the floor. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the bloodless face on the beam, seeming to twist into a silent, horrifying scream of its own. The fragile light of dawn brought no comfort, only the stark realization that the treasure was tainted. Sleep offered no escape, and every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen horrors. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he needed answers before this spectral terror consumed him entirely. The fragile light of dawn brought no comfort, only the stark realization that the treasure was tainted. Sleep offered no escape, and every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen horrors. Bu sat huddled on the mat, beside him, her initial attempts at reassurance replaced by a frightened silence as she witnessed the aftermath of his terror. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every creak of the bamboo walls, every sigh of the wind, sent shivers down his spine. He saw the pale face with the severed arm behind his closed eyelids, felt the phantom drip of blood on his skin. The exquisite red jade bracelet, hidden beneath his pillow, felt like a block of ice, radiating a palpable malevolence. Hope had curdled into stark terror. Fortune. What good was fortune if it brought this spectral nightmare into his home, into his very mind? He needed answers. He needed Counselor Guy now. The next 2 days were an agony of waiting. Bu barely ate, jumped at every unexpected sound, and refused to let the jade bracelet out of his sight, yet simultaneously felt repulsed by its presence. He kept it wrapped, hidden, but its cold weight was a constant reminder. Mai watched him, her own fear growing, seeing the robust, capable man she knew reduced to a haunted, hollow-eyed wreck. Even Tam, the strange three-legged dog, seemed subdued, staying close to the hut, occasionally whining softly for no apparent reason, his copper eyes watchful. Finally, on the third morning, a familiar voice called from outside. Counselor Guy had returned. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over Bu. He practically dragged the elder into the hut, barely giving him time to register the couple's disheveled state. "Counselor, thank the heavens you're back." Bu blurted out, his voice raspy from lack of sleep and residual fear. Guy, a man whose calm demeanor rarely wavered, raised an eyebrow at Bu's frantic energy and the palpable tension in the small dwelling. He noted Mai's pale face, the dark circles under Bu's eyes. "Bu, my friend," he said slowly, his gaze sharp, "you look as if you've wrestled with demons. Your daughter-in-law said you wished to see me urgently. What troubles plague this house?" With trembling hands, Bu retrieved the agarwood box from its hiding place. He hesitated for a split second, then opened it, revealing the blood-red jade bracelet nestled within. He pushed it towards the counselor. "This," Bu whispered. "We found this. In the western forest." Counselor Guy leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He picked up the bracelet, his usual placid expression shifting into one of stunned recognition, then dawning horror. The color drained from his face. He turned the heavy bangle over in his hands, his fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface. He looked from the bracelet to Bu's haunted face and back again. A long silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the small cooking fire Mai nervously tended. "By the ancestors," Guy finally breathed, his voice barely audible, heavy with a sudden, profound gravity. "Where?" "Bu, tell me exactly where you found this." Stammering slightly, Bu recounted the story, reclaiming the wasteland, Tam's strange digging near the zone tree, the unearthing of the box. As he spoke, Counselor Guy listened intently, his expression growing increasingly somber, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and dread. When Bu finished, Guy carefully placed the bracelet back in the box, as if reluctant to touch it further. He sighed, a deep, troubled sound that seemed to echo the forest's own melancholy. "Bu," he began, his voice low and grave, "what you hold here, it is not simply treasure. It is an object steeped in sorrow, violence, and profound desecration." He paused, gathering his thoughts, perhaps deciding how much of the terrible truth to reveal. "Do you know of Hong Ti Nan?" he asked quietly. Bu shook his head. The name meant nothing to him. "She was the mother of our governor, Tam Tan," Guy explained, his gaze distant. "A woman of great piety and kindness. While the governor pursued power and wealth, his mother devoted her life to charity, to easing the suffering of the poor. She was widely loved, respected by everyone in this region, a true light in darker times." He picked up the bracelet again, holding it almost reluctantly. This was her most cherished possession. Given to her by the governor himself on her 80th birthday, years ago. She wore it always. A chill traced its way down Bu's spine. He remembered the apparition on the beam, pale, white-clad, female. Guy continued, his voice laced with sadness. 5 years ago, Hom T Nan passed away. A peaceful end, at the ripe age of 83. Or so it should have been. The governor, in his grief, planned to bury her with great ceremony and many valuables, gold, silver. I advised against it. Grave robbing has become a plague in these lands, as you know. Such treasures only invite desecration, deny the dead their rest. He sighed again. The governor agreed, mostly. But this bracelet, he insisted it be buried with her. She loved it so dearly in life, he said. It would comfort her spirit. Guy felt a cold dread creeping into his heart. He could see where this was going. 3 days after the burial, Guy said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his eyes filled with remembered horror, word came. Her grave had been violated. Robbed. He paused, swallowing hard. We rushed there. The earth was torn up, the coffin lid pried open. They had taken the valuables, the agarwood box it was likely buried in, but they did something else. Something monstrous. He looked directly at Bu, his eyes conveying the atrocity before the words left his lips. To get this bracelet off her wrist, they chopped off her hand, Bu. Mai cried out, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Bu felt the blood drain from his face. The vision flashed before his eyes again, the woman on the beam, the dripping stump where her arms should have been. It wasn't a nightmare. It was her. Hom T Nan. Her tormented spirit, bound to the object stolen through such horrific violence. The scratch on the box, his own careless hoe striking the container of this desecrated relic. The governor was consumed by rage and grief, Guy continued, oblivious to Bu's internal reeling for a moment. He sent soldiers scouring the province, offered huge rewards, but the culprits, and the bracelet, vanished without a trace. We assumed they fled far away, or perhaps hid their loot, intending to retrieve it when things calmed down. He looked down at the bracelet, then back at Bu's ashen face. It seems they hid it here. In the wasteland. Buried like common dirt. The puzzle pieces slammed into place in Bu's mind with sickening clarity. The coldness of the jade. The stench. The apparitions. The woman with the severed arm. It was Hom T Nan, her spirit unable to rest, tethered to the stolen bracelet, perhaps drawn to whoever disturbed its hiding place. The treasure wasn't a blessing, it was a magnet for restless, violated spirits, a conduit for unimaginable horror. All thoughts of wealth, of a better life, evaporated, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror and revulsion. This thing in his house, this object he had coveted, was soaked in blood and desecration. It had invited a tormented ghost into his home, into his mind. Take it. Bu choked out, shoving the box across the small table towards Guy with such force it nearly slid off. His hands shook violently. Take it away, counselor. Please. Give it back to the governor. Lay her spirit to rest. I don't want it. Get it out of my house. His voice rose, bordering on hysteria. He wanted no part of this fortune, this blood money. He wanted only peace, release from the spectral nightmare the red jade had unleashed. He wanted his simple, impoverished life back, free from the haunting hue of cursed treasure. As the counselor departed, taking the source of their terror with him, a fragile peace settled over the small house. They had renounced a fortune, but perhaps regained their lives. Yet, the silence felt heavy, pregnant with the question, was the ordeal truly over? As the counselor departed, taking the source of their terror, the blood-red jade bracelet, with him, a fragile peace settled over the small hut. They had renounced a fortune, stared into the abyss of supernatural horror, and somehow, emerged. They had perhaps regained their lives, or at least, the chance to live them without the chilling presence of a violated spirit. Yet, the silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with the unspoken question, was the ordeal truly over? Had the restless soul of Hong Ti Nan found peace now that her cherished, desecrated possession was on its way back to her kin? Or had their brush with the darkness left an indelible mark? They didn't have long to wonder. A few days later, Counselor Di returned, not empty-handed this time, but bearing sacks heavy with gold and silver bars, a staggering reward dispatched by a profoundly grateful Governor Tam Ten upon receiving his mother's bracelet and hearing the tale of its recovery. Bu and Mai stared at the gleaming metal, piled impossibly high on their humble table, with wide, disbelieving eyes. The sheer weight of it, the tangible reality of this unexpected wealth, was almost as shocking as the terror they had endured. Tears streamed down Mai's face, tears not of fear this time, but of overwhelming relief and disbelief. Their poverty, the relentless grinding burden that had defined their entire existence, was well and truly broken. The transformation of the Bu family over the next year was the talk of Yanhe village, yet it unfolded with a quiet dignity that silenced most gossip. They did not hoard their newfound wealth or flaunt it ostentatiously. Guided by Bu's innate practicality and Mai's deep-seated compassion, they first settled any outstanding debts, ensuring no shadow lingered over their new beginning. Then, they invested wisely, not in frivolous luxuries, but in the very thing they had craved most, land. Fertile paddy fields, dozens of acres, carefully chosen, promising sustenance and security for generations to come. Their dilapidated hut, a symbol of their past struggles, was dismantled. In its place rose a sturdy, spacious Kang Trang house, built with solid timber beams and a tiled roof designed to withstand the monsoon rains and scorching sun. It wasn't a palace, but it was clean, airy, and, most importantly, theirs. With the expansion of their landholdings came the need for help. They hired villagers, first a few, then eventually up to 10 servants, treating them not as underlings but with fairness and respect, paying decent wages and ensuring they were well fed. Granaries that had once stood empty began to fill, symbols of their hard-won prosperity. From the brink of starvation, Mr. and Mrs. Bu became respected landowners. Yet, crucially, the core of their beings remained untouched by wealth. They remembered the sting of hunger, the shame of poverty, the kindness of neighbors who had shared what little they had. They greeted everyone with the same simple humility as before, offering tea and conversation without airs or condescension. This stood in stark contrast to some of the other established landlords in the village, known for their arrogance and disdain for those less fortunate. The Bus remembered hardship, and because they remembered, they practiced charity. One of their first decisions, made together one quiet evening, concerned the very patch of wasteland where their strange fortune had begun. Uncle Tu, Mai had said softly, thinking of their neighbor whose family struggled endlessly with ailing elders and unproductive land. He works so hard, Bu, but his family suffers. That land we started clearing, perhaps we could give it to them. Consider it a blessing passed on. Bu, sipping his tea, nodded readily. I was thinking the same, wife. So much has happened, I almost forgot. It's good land, or will be, with work. He deserves a chance. And prepare 5 silver bars, he added. A little capital to start, like how they helped us with potatoes when Mio was small and our own pot was empty. They never forgot a kindness, nor an opportunity to extend one. On feast days and during lean times, their house became known for its generosity, distributing rice and money to refugees and those struggling, cementing a reputation that spread far beyond Yanhe's borders. Amidst this new life, Tam, the 3-legged dog, thrived. He grew remarkably quickly, filling out from a skeletal pup into a sturdy, handsome dog, weighing a solid 15 kilos despite his missing limb. His white coat gleamed, meticulously groomed by Mai or one of the servants. Mio adored him, and Tam, despite his strange nature, seemed patient and gentle with the boy. He became an accepted, if enigmatic, member of the household, even affectionately called Uncle Tam by the servants who recognized his special place in the family's story. Yet, as Tam grew, his peculiarities became even more pronounced, setting him apart from every other dog in the village and reminding the Bus, subtly but persistently, of his uncanny origins. Mr. Bew noted 3 distinct points of strangeness about their guardian dog. First, his diet remained bafflingly ascetic. In a household now abundant with flavorful food, fragrant braised pork, rich stir-fries, savory fish stews, Tam showed utter indifference. He would sniff politely at the bowls offered to him, perhaps lick a finger dipped in broth, but then turn away. What he craved, what he ate with quiet enthusiasm, was the simplest fare: plain boiled cassava or sweet potato, steamed greens, boiled corn. He was, for all intents and purposes, a vegetarian dog, a creature content with the humblest sustenance even amidst plenty. Easy to care for, certainly, but decidedly unnatural. Second, was his inexplicable dominance over other canines. Yenha village, like most rural communities, teemed with dogs of varying sizes and temperaments, most allowed to roam freely. Fights were common. Yet, whenever Tam accompanied Bew or Mai on walks to the fields or through the village, other dogs reacted with extraordinary deference, bordering on fear. Even Bo, the massive, notoriously fierce dog belonging to the village chief, a muscular beast with a wolf-like crest and a reputation for savaging anything that crossed his path, would falter at Tam's approach. Bew witnessed it himself one afternoon. Bo came charging, teeth bared, ready to assert his dominance. Bew braced himself. But Tam simply stepped forward, calm, silent, meeting Bo's aggressive posture with a quiet, unwavering gaze from those copper eyes. The effect was instantaneous and startling. Bo skidded to a halt, whining, his hackles dropping, before tucking his tail between his legs and scrambling away in utter panic, tumbling head over heels into a muddy paddy field in his haste. Tam merely watched him go, then calmly lifted his leg against a nearby tree before trotting off, perhaps to chase a butterfly. Bew stared, dumbfounded. His quiet, 3-legged companion possessed an aura, an authority, that utterly unnerved even the most aggressive village dogs. How? Third, and perhaps most unsettling, was Tam's unwavering nightly ritual. Mai had prepared a soft, silk-lined bed for him in a warm corner of the main room. But Tam would never sleep there. As soon as the household settled for the night, regardless of wind or rain, cold or heat, Tam would limp silently to the front porch and take up his position, always in the exact same spot just to the right of the main door. He wouldn't lie down immediately but would sit, alert, facing outwards, for a long time before finally curling up. Their initial attempts to bring him inside were futile. He would simply wait until they were asleep and sneak back out to his designated post. Eventually, they stopped trying, accepting this strange, seminal behavior as just another facet of Tam's mystery. It was as if he were standing guard, watching over the house, protecting it from something unseen in the darkness. They loved Tam deeply. He was their good fortune, their strange blessing, their loyal companion. But the mystery of his origins, the source of his peculiar traits and uncanny abilities, remained. Who was he? What was he? Was he merely a dog they had saved, his oddities a result of his unknown past? Or was he something more, a guardian sent by fate, a creature still somehow connected to the spirits of the forest, a living reminder that their peaceful prosperity was born from a brush with the supernatural? Life had changed dramatically for the Bew family, gilded now, and seemingly secure. But every night, as the village slept, the 3-legged dog kept watch, his copper eyes fixed on the darkness. A silent protector, a living enigma, waiting for a threat only he seemed to sense. Life had changed for the Bew family, gilded and secure. But every night, as the village slept, the 3-legged dog kept watch, his copper eyes fixed on the darkness. A silent protector, a living enigma, waiting for a threat only he seemed to sense. The comfortable rhythm of their new life, overseeing the fields, managing the household, enjoying the simple pleasure of a full belly and a secure roof, felt solid, permanent. But the peace bought with haunted treasure rested on fragile foundations, and the watchful gaze of their strange guardian hinted that the shadows of the past were not yet fully banished. The unease began subtly, a shift in the atmosphere like the air before a monsoon storm. A certain tension seemed to hum beneath the surface of Yenha's daily life. Then, one cold winter morning, Tam vanished. At first, Beau and Mai weren't overly concerned. Tam, despite his vigil, occasionally explored the nearby fields. But when he didn't return for the midday meal, a flicker of anxiety ignited. By evening, with no sign of the distinctive three-legged gate anywhere in the village, anxiety turned to worry. They called his name until their throats were raw, questioned neighbors, searched the surrounding paths. Nothing. The dog had simply disappeared. The next day dawned gray and heavy, mirroring the couple's mood. A sense of foreboding, cold and sharp, settled in their hearts. This wasn't like Tam. Beau mobilized their 10 servants, ordering a halt to all other work. "Find him," he commanded, his voice tight with uncharacteristic fear. "Search every field, every patch of woods bordering the village. Ask everyone." Mai, more frantic, dispatched riders to neighboring villages, even to the district town, instructing them to check the notorious dog slaughterhouses, promising any reward if Tam was found alive. She couldn't bear the thought. Mr. and Mrs. Beau joined the search themselves, scouring the familiar landscape, their calls growing hoarse, their hope dwindling with the fading light. By nightfall, the search parties returned, exhausted, mud-splattered, and empty-handed. Tam was gone. Mai collapsed in tears, inconsolable, refusing food and water, shutting herself in her room. Beau sat numbly on the porch, Tam's usual spot, staring out into the oppressive darkness, waiting for a familiar limping shape that never materialized. The house felt hollow without the dog's quiet presence. What had happened? Had he simply wandered too far? Or had something taken him? The superstitions of the forest, long dormant, stirred uneasily in Beau's mind. He finally dragged himself inside, exhausted, his heart heavy with a nameless dread. That night, sleep offered no respite. Instead, it brought terror. Beau found himself walking a phantom path, drawn inexorably back towards the western forest, towards the place where they had first found Tam, the place where Counselor Guy had later confirmed Hong Ti Nan's desecrated bracelet had been hidden. But in the dream, standing beside the disturbed earth near the zone tree, were not trees, but figures. 3 spectral shapes, shimmering in an unnatural moonlight. It was Uncle Tu, his wife, and his elderly mother. Their faces were horribly distorted, streaked with blood, eyes wide with an eternal scream. They raised spectral hands, pointing towards Beau, their mouths opening, but only a single, chilling whisper emerged, echoing in his mind, "Run." Beau woke with a strangled cry, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sat bolt upright, gasping for air. Beside him, Mai was also sitting up, her face pale, her eyes wide with identical terror. "Beau," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I dreamed." Uncle Tu, his family, blood, they stared at each other, the shared horror of the identical nightmare hanging between them in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. A terrible, spectral warning. What they didn't know, couldn't know, was that miles away, deep in the forest, at the site of Hong Ti Nan's original resting place, Tam stood sentinel. As the nightmare gripped the boos, the 3-legged dog lifted his head, a low, mournful howl rising from his throat, a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of the night, silencing the forest creatures, echoing with an ancient sorrow and a fierce, protective urgency. He scratched at the earth with his single front paw, then turned, his copper eyes blazing with purpose, and began the long journey back towards Yen Ha, back towards the family he guarded. The nightmare's chilling message propelled Beau and Mai out of bed as dawn painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. They had to warn someone, check on Uncle Tu's family immediately. But as they stumbled towards the village edge, frantic screams ripped through the morning air. Others were already running, faces pale with panic, towards the cluster of huts where Uncle Tu lived. They found young Mo, a village boy known for his early morning foraging, huddled beneath a banyan tree, shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak, pointing with a trembling finger towards Tu's hut. The scene inside was one of unimaginable butchery. Uncle Tu lay sprawled near the doorway, his head severed gruesomely from his body. His wife was nearby, similarly mutilated. In the small sleeping alcove, the frail body of Tu's elderly mother lay on her mat, also decapitated. Blood soaked the earthen floor, splattered the walls, dripped from the rough wooden furniture. The air was thick with the metallic stench of death. It wasn't robbery, nothing appeared stolen. It was slaughter. Brutal, savage, inexplicable. The horror washed over the gathered villagers in waves of nausea and terror. Mr. and Mrs. Bew, reeling from their nightmare, pushed through the stunned crowd, their own grief mingling with a sickening dread. The warning had come too late. The authorities were summoned, the Huin Mandarin arriving to oversee the grim proceedings. Seeing their friends so tragically slain, Bew and Mai, numb with shock, took charge of the necessary arrangements, supervising the grim task of preparing the bodies, organizing the funeral rites according to custom. A heavy pall of fear descended over Yanhe village. Who could have done such a thing? And why? The funeral was a somber affair, the entire village shrouded in grief and fear. The 3 coffins lay and stayed in Tu's hut for one night, as was tradition, before the burial the following morning. Bew spent the entire day overseeing the preparations, helping neighbors, trying to offer comfort while wrestling with his own grief and the chilling memory of the dream. Exhausted, emotionally drained, he finally headed home late that evening, Mai having urged him to rest before the final vigil. As he stepped into his own yard, his heart gave a sudden leap of pure joy. There, standing silently in the moonlight, was Tam. He was back. Relief washed over Bew, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. "Tam! You're back," he cried out, hurrying towards the dog, hand outstretched to pet the familiar white fur. But Tam didn't greet him with his usual quiet affection. As Bew approached, the dog's body stiffened. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. His hackles rose, his lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth gleaming white in the moonlight. Drool dripped from his jaws. His copper eyes, usually so calm and intelligent, now blazed with a terrifying, feral light. Bew stopped dead, stunned. "Tam. What?" Before he could react further, Tam launched himself. It was incredibly fast, a blur of white fury. He didn't go for the throat, but slammed his body against Bew's legs, then lunged upwards, sinking his teeth deep into Bew's forearm. Pain, sharp and searing, shot through Bew's arm. He cried out, stumbling back, trying to shake the dog off, utterly bewildered by the unprovoked, savage attack. Tam clung on, growling, shaking his head violently. Neighbors, hearing the commotion, rushed out. Someone struck Tam with a heavy bamboo pole, forcing the dog to release his grip. Tam snarled, then turned and bolted, disappearing into the darkness. Bew collapsed, clutching his bleeding arm, shock and pain overwhelming him. Why? Why would Tam attack him? His loyal companion, their savior, it made no sense. He was helped into his house, his arm hastily bandaged, his mind reeling. Fever soon set in, whether from the wound or the profound shock, he couldn't tell. He tossed and turned on his mat, Mai bathing his forehead with cool water, her face etched with worry and confusion. As delirium took hold, Bew drifted. He found himself once again on that spectral forest path, drawn towards the now familiar grave site beneath the ancient trees. The spirit of Hong Ti Nan sat there, bathed in an ethereal moonlight, her form clearer now, her expression filled with infinite sorrow and urgent warning. "Heed me, mortal," her voice echoed, not in his ears, but directly in his mind, cold and clear as winter stars. "The one who desecrated my rest, the one who stole my bracelet and severed my hand, has returned. He followed you from the forest, drawn by the lingering scent of the jade, even after you relinquished it." Bew's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. "The murderer. He lurks in the shadows," the spirit continued, her voice resonating with urgency. "He saw your newfound wealth. He believes you still possess treasure, perhaps more than just the bracelet. Greed consumes him. He struck down your friends, the family of two, mistaking their humble home perhaps, or silencing any who might have seen him near the forest edge. His bloodlust is not sated. He comes for you and yours tonight, Bew. For your gold, for your silver, for your lives. The attack. Tam. But Tam, Bew thought, confusion warring with the rising tide of terror. He attacked me. The dog knows, the spirit interrupted his thoughts, her ethereal eyes filled with a strange mix of pity and respect. Tam, the guardian I saved moments before my own end, bound to you by gratitude, sensed the killer's presence, his imminent strike. His attack on you, it was a desperate act, born of loyalty, not malice. To keep you away, to delay you, perhaps to draw the danger to himself. He tries to protect you still. Even now, the murderer approaches your home. Tam will try to stop him, but his strength may not suffice against such malice. The spirit's form flickered, her voice fading but for one final, desperate plea. Do not return before the deepest hour passes. Trust the guardian. Bew jolted awake, the spirit's warning burning like ice in his veins. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding, sweat cold on his skin. He understood. The murderer. Uncle 2's killer. The bracelet thief. He was here. Coming for them. And Tam. Tam wasn't a traitor, he was their protector, fighting a desperate battle. He glanced wildly around the room. The oil lamp showed the night was still deep, but the hour had midnight passed. The spirit's warning, but the immediate, visceral threat. He had to get home. Now. He jolted awake, sweat cold on his skin, the spirit's desperate plea ringing in his ears. Midnight had passed, but the danger was here, now. And Tam. Tam was fighting it. He had to get home. There was no time for hesitation, no room for the fog of fever or the throbbing agony in his arm. Adrenaline surged, sharp and cold, overriding everything else. He gasped, shaking her awake with his good hand. The dream, it wasn't just a dream. The killer, the grave robber, he's at the house. He's trying to kill us. Tam. Tam knew. He tried to stop me. Gods, he's fighting him now. Mai's eyes flew open, the shared terror of her own nightmare instantly replaced by the stark, immediate horror of his words. She scrambled up, no questions asked. The spirit's warning, Bew's desperate urgency, it painted a picture far too vivid, too terrifying to doubt. Bew snatched the heavy machete from beside the door, his knuckles white on the handle. Mai grabbed the oil lamp, its flame casting wild, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with unseen menace. They burst out of the neighbor's hut and ran, heedless of the cold night air, heedless of Bew's injury, driven only by a desperate need to reach their home, to face whatever awaited them. The familiar path back felt alien, fraught with peril. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every tree seemed to lean in menacingly. The silence of the sleeping village was oppressive, amplifying the frantic pounding of their own hearts. As they rounded the final bend, their house came into view, bathed in the weak, watery moonlight. It looked quiet. Too quiet. The sturdy front door, always securely barred after nightfall, hung open a few inches, a dark, silent invitation. A wave of nausea washed over Bew. He slowed his pace, motioning for Mai to stay back slightly. Holding the machete ready, the lamp held high in Mai's trembling hand casting flickering light ahead, he pushed the door open wider and peered inside. The main room was disturbed. A small woven stool lay on its side. The sleeping mats were kicked askew, their simple blankets tangled. Signs of a struggle. An intrusion. But the room was empty. He called out, his voice hoarse. Tam. Anyone. Only silence answered. A deeper dread began to coil in his stomach. Where was Tam? Where was the intruder? Then Mai gasped, pointing. On the packed earth floor, leading from the center of the room towards the back door that opened onto the garden, were dark stains. Small at first, then larger, smeared. Unmistakably blood. A chilling trail leading outwards. Towards the pond. Their eyes met, reflecting shared horror. Without a word, they moved, following the grim path, stepping carefully over the bloodstains, the lamp casting wavering light on the gruesome evidence. Out into the cool night air of the garden, past the rows of sleeping vegetables, past the silent bulk of the new rice granary. The blood trail continued, clearer now on the dew-damp grass, leading directly to the edge of the small pond. The water lay still and black, reflecting the sliver of moon like a shard of broken glass. Dew held the lamp higher, its light skimming across the surface. Something floated near the far bank, caught in the reeds. Something pale, and something dark. He waded into the shallows, my close behind, her breath catching in choked sobs. The lamplight steadied on the floating shapes. A man, dressed in dark, ragged clothes, lay face down, one arm flung out awkwardly. His hair floated like dark weed around his head. Dew didn't recognize him, but the savage tearing at the back of his neck left no doubt about his fate or his identity. This was the murderer. The grave robber. The source of the curse, the violence, the terror. And beside him, tangled with him in the murky water, almost hidden beneath the killer's bulk, was Tam. His beautiful white coat was stained dark red, plastered to his still form. A deep, vicious slash ran across his back, the blade, perhaps the killer's own machete, now lying glinting in the mud nearby, having bitten deep. His eyes were closed. He was gone. But even in death, the Guardian's final act was horrifyingly clear. Tam's jaws, locked with the last ounce of his strength, were clamped tight around the dead murderer's throat. His sharp teeth were buried deep, unbreakable even now. He hadn't just died fighting, he had died winning, silencing the threat to his adopted family with his last breath, his last defiant act of loyalty. Dew fell to his knees in the cold water, the lamp nearly slipping from Mai's grasp. A raw sound tore from his throat, a mixture of grief, horror, and a profound, shattering understanding. The spirit's warning. Tam's frantic attack earlier, not betrayal, but a desperate, misunderstood attempt to protect him, to keep him away. The strange dog, the foundling, the silent watcher on the porch, he had been their guardian all along, bound by an inexplicable loyalty that had led him to make the ultimate sacrifice. Mai knelt beside Dew, her tears flowing freely now, reaching out a trembling hand to stroke Tam's cold, wet fur, whispering his name over and over like a prayer. They stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the cold water beside their fallen protector and the vanquished evil, the silence broken only by their choked sobs and the indifferent chirping of early crickets. As the first faint streaks of dawn painted the sky, a grim resolve settled over them. With heavy hearts, they dragged the bodies from the pond. The murderer they wrapped in old sacking. Dew carried the grim burden far out, past the village boundaries, to the edge of the desolate Donyem field. There, without ceremony, without a marker, he buried the man deep, wanting no trace of his violence to contaminate their land or memory. Let the forest reclaim him. For Tam, however, there would be honor. Back in their own garden, they chose a spot beneath a fragrant frangipani tree, a place where Tam had sometimes liked to nap in the sun. Mai gently washed the blood and mud from his white coat, her tears falling onto his still form. She wrapped him carefully in her finest piece of silk, a length she had treasured, now offered as a final shroud for their loyal friend. They buried him deep, Dew's movements slow and deliberate, each shovelful of earth feeling like a physical blow. They wept openly, words of gratitude and sorrow mingling with the soft thud of earth filling the grave. In the following weeks, life slowly resumed a semblance of normality, but the shadow of the ordeal remained. The Dew family, though now undeniably wealthy, lived quietly. They commissioned a small, beautifully carved stone shrine to be placed over Tam's grave. It wasn't elaborate, but it was made with care and respect. Mai visited it daily, leaving small offerings of fresh water, sometimes a simple flower, or a few grains of boiled rice, whispering her thanks to the silent guardian beneath the earth. It became a place of quiet remembrance, a poignant reminder of the loyalty that had saved them. Remembering the spirit's role, and feeling a sense of obligation, Bu also made inquiries. With the governor's blessing, discreet arrangements were made. The resting place of Hom Ti Nan in the wild forest was given proper attention. Whether her actual remains were moved or a significant memorial established at the village cemetery wasn't widely known, but it was understood that steps were taken to honor her spirit, to finally allow her the peaceful, respected rest she had been denied for so long. The wealth remained, undeniable, transforming their material lives. Their fields prospered, their house stood as a symbol of security, their generosity continued to earn them respect in Yanha. But the fortune was forever intertwined with the memory of terror, of blood spilled, of a loyalty beyond comprehension. In the quiet garden, Tam's small temple stood as a testament, bathed in the same moonlight he once watched under, a silent reminder of the spectral paths that had crossed their own, and the unassuming, three-legged guardian who had walked those paths beside them, faithful unto death. The wealth remained, but it was forever tinged with sorrow and gratitude. In the quiet garden, Tam's small temple stood as a testament to a loyalty that transcended life itself, a silent reminder of the spectral paths that had crossed their own. And so, life in Yanha village settled back into its familiar, predictable rhythms, the timeless cycles of planting and harvest, the predictable ebb and flow of births and deaths, the mundane circulation of gossip and the occasional, welcome punctuation of community celebrations. For Mr. and Mrs. Bu, however, the rhythm of existence, while outwardly restored to a state of peaceful prosperity, was irrevocably altered deep within. Their lives, once defined by the relentless grind of poverty, were now forever marked, forever shadowed and illuminated, by the memory of that extraordinary, terrifying year when fate, fortune, fear, and profound sacrifice converged upon their humble doorstep. Their odyssey had begun in the choking dust of desperation, a primal yearning not for riches, but simply for survival, for the dignity of providing for their young son, Mio. That initial, fearful gamble, the decision to defy generations of whispered warnings and venture into the reputedly haunted depths of the western forest, had been a catalyst, setting in motion a cascade of events more bizarre, more harrowing, and ultimately more transformative than any village folktale could have possibly conceived. Who could have foreseen that the silent, watchful woods would yield not just a patch of forgotten, fertile earth, but an abandoned hut sheltering a creature as uncanny and enigmatic as Tam. The three-legged dog, white as bone save for his stark black socks, with eyes like chips of polished copper holding an unnerving intelligence. An omen? A stray? Or something else entirely? He was the first ripple in the placid surface of their lives, the first hint of the strange currents that were about to pull them under. And it was this creature, this silent, three-legged mystery, who had led them, with an instinct that felt far too deliberate for mere chance, to the buried secret. The exquisitely carved agarwood box, unearthed from the roots of an ancient zone tree, containing the blood-red jade bracelet. Ah, the bracelet! At first sight, it shimmered with promise, the answer to every prayer whispered in the dark hours of hunger and despair. It felt like hope made tangible, cool and heavy in their trembling hands, a solid escape route from the crushing weight of their existence. They remembered the tales of Mr. Pu, the villager touched by similar fortune, whose discovery had paved his path out of Yanha. For one dizzying, intoxicating moment, they allowed themselves to believe that such a miracle could happen to them. That their suffering was finally over. But fate, as the Bu family learned with chilling certainty, seldom offers such gifts without demanding a steep, often terrifying price. The profound coldness radiating from the jade was more than just the chill of buried stone, it was the icy breath of the violated dead, the lingering touch of supernatural dread. The wealth they had stumbled upon was not a blessing, but a curse, intrinsically bound to the tormented spirit of Hom Ti Nan, murdered in her bed, her grave desecrated, her hand brutally severed for the very object they now held. The beautiful dream of prosperity dissolved into a waking nightmare. Whispers in the dark escalated to horrifying screams. Spectral figures materialized in reflections and clung to ceiling beams, dripping phantom blood. The forest hadn't yielded fortune, it had unleashed a haunting, a terrifying manifestation of greed's violent legacy. Their journey transformed instantly from a quest for livelihood into a frantic flight from the very treasure they had coveted. The encounter with Counselor Guy, the revelation of the bracelet's gruesome provenance, a tale of robbery, murder, and unspeakable desecration, became not just an explanation, but a confirmation of the profound darkness clinging to the Jade. Returning the bracelet, renouncing any claim to the fortune it represented, ceased to be a choice. It was a necessity, an act of desperate appeasement, a plea for release from the spectral horrors that had invaded their lives. Then came the final twist of fate, the supreme irony, the governor's reward. Delivered by Counselor Guy, the sacks heavy with gold and silver bestowed upon them the very wealth the cursed Jade had promised, but only after they had willingly, desperately, relinquished the tainted source. They became landowners, their house secure, their future provided for. Yet, this prosperity felt different. It wasn't the result of a lucky find, but the outcome of a harrowing ordeal, a reward for doing right by a tormented spirit, a compensation for the terror they had endured. Perhaps for this reason, wealth did not corrupt them. The memory of fear, the knowledge of their proximity to supernatural destruction, kept them grounded. They remained Bu and Mai, their hearts still rooted in the soil of Yen Ha, their hands still open in charity to those less fortunate, like Uncle Tu, forever mindful of the fragility of peace and the unpredictable turns of fate. And at the core of their transformed lives, the quiet, enduring enigma, was the memory and legacy of Tam. The strange guardian. His peculiar asceticism, his uncanny authority over other animals, his unwavering nightly vigil, these traits remained mysteries, subtle but constant reminders of his connection to forces beyond their understanding. Was he an ordinary dog imbued with extraordinary loyalty by circumstance? A forest spirit in disguise? A karmic guardian sent by the wronged Hong Ti Nan? They never found a definitive answer, nor did they truly seek one. What mattered was the undeniable truth of his actions. His loyalty was absolute, his courage unquestionable. The final, brutal confrontation at the pond, his small body broken but his jaws locked in a death grip on the throat of the man who had come to destroy them, was the ultimate testament. He had absorbed the final measure of the curse, paid the blood debt incurred by the unearthed Jade, shielding his chosen family with his own life. His sacrifice resonated long after the immediate grief subsided. The small stone shrine in their garden became more than a memorial, it was a focal point of their gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound, inexplicable bond they had shared with the three-legged creature who had saved them. His story, perhaps embellished over time, likely wove itself into the tapestry of Yen Ha's own folklore, a tale whispered by elders, a reminder of the hidden dangers in the western forest, the power of restless spirits, and the possibility of finding guardianship in the most unexpected of forms. For Bu and Mai, life flowed onward, marked by the rhythms of the seasons and the steady growth of their son, Mio. They lived comfortably, respected in their community, their generosity a quiet counterpoint to their considerable wealth. But beneath the surface of their peaceful existence lay the indelible imprint of their journey through darkness. They knew, in a way few others could, that the mundane world rests precariously atop foundations of mystery, that fate weaves threads both beautiful and terrifying, and that the deepest loyalty can sometimes be found watching silently from the porch, embodied in the unassuming form of a three-legged dog. The legacies of Yen Ha were not just in the land and the rice, but in the whispered stories, the honored memories, and the enduring awareness of the thin veil separating the seen from the unseen.